People-pleasing is a habit that often looks like kindness on the surface, but beneath it, there's usually a very different motive driving the behavior: fear. Fear of rejection, fear of disappointing others, fear of conflict, fear of being judged, and ultimately, fear of not being loved or accepted. That fear hides in the small choices we make every day, saying yes when we want to say no, apologizing when we've done nothing wrong, putting other people's needs before our own, and avoiding confrontation even when our values are being compromised. It's so deeply ingrained in many of us, especially women who have been taught from a young age to be agreeable, to keep the peace, and to be liked above all else. People-pleasing often begins in childhood. Maybe you grew up in a home where love and approval were conditional, only given when you were behaving properly, being obedient, or meeting someone else's needs. Maybe you were praised for being such a good girl, and without realizing it, you equated being liked with being safe. So you learned to read the room, to anticipate others' moods, to adjust yourself to fit in, to smooth things over when things got tense. And over time, those patterns turned into a reflex. You became someone who prioritized harmony over honesty, who avoided discomfort by sacrificing authenticity, who confused compliance with compassion. But here's the truth: constantly trying to make everyone happy isn't kindness, it's control. When you're people-pleasing, you're not actually being generous. You're trying to manage how people see you. You're trying to avoid rejection. You're trying to stay in their good graces so they won't leave, judge, or criticize you. That's not love. That's fear disguised as virtue. This habit becomes a trap. At first, it may feel like it's working. People like you, they call you sweet, dependable, easygoing. But eventually, it takes a toll. You start to lose yourself in the roles you play. You say yes so often that you forget what your own boundaries are. You're so used to putting other people first that your own needs feel selfish. You swallow your feelings until they turn into resentment. You get exhausted, burned out, emotionally numb. And then you wonder why you feel invisible, why your relationships feel one-sided, why nobody seems to show up for you the way you show up for them. It's because people-pleasing doesn't build real connection. It builds performance. When you're constantly curating your behavior to keep others happy, they're not connecting with the real you. They're connecting with the version of you that you think they want. And as long as you keep showing up as that version, you won't feel truly seen or loved, because deep down, you'll know that love is conditional on you playing a role. That's a lonely way to live. Let's be clear. Being kind is not the same as being nice. Kindness is honest. Kindness is brave. Kindness sometimes says the hard thing, sets the tough boundary, walks away when something isn't healthy. Niceness is often a mask. It says what people want to hear. It avoids friction. It trades authenticity for approval. And over time, niceness becomes a cage. One that looks polite on the outside, but is suffocating on the inside. The fear behind people-pleasing doesn't go away by accident. You have to confront it. You have to start noticing all the little ways you bend, shrink, silence yourself to avoid discomfort. You have to start asking yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I say what I really think? If I set a boundary? If I disappoint someone? And then you have to challenge those fears, because most of the time they're rooted in old stories that no longer apply. You are not responsible for other people's feelings. Let that sink in. You are not here to be everyone's emotional caretaker. You are allowed to have boundaries. You are allowed to say no without guilt. You're allowed to prioritize your well-being. And if someone only likes you when you're convenient, agreeable, or self-sacrificing, they don't truly respect you. Real respect doesn't require you to abandon yourself. The truth is, The more you try to be liked by everyone, the more disconnected you become from yourself. And here's the paradox. When you start being real, when you stop people pleasing and start honoring your truth, not everyone will like it. Some people will get uncomfortable. Some will push back. Some might walk away. But the ones who remain, they'll be connecting with the real you. And that kind of connection is worth so much more than shallow approval. Undoing the people-pleasing habit takes courage. It means unlearning years of conditioning. It means learning how to tolerate other people's discomfort and not taking responsibility. For it means choosing honesty over harmony, self-respect over superficial peace. It's not easy, but it is necessary if you want to live a life that feels true. Every time you say yes when you mean no, you're saying no to yourself. You're reinforcing the belief that other people's needs matter more than your own. And eventually, that builds resentment, not just toward others, but toward yourself. You start to feel like you're betraying yourself, and in a way, you are. You're abandoning your own inner compass to follow someone else's map. You're outsourcing your sense of worth to other people's opinions. That's a fragile way to live, and it puts your emotional well-being in someone else's hands. Reclaiming your power means getting honest about your motives. Ask yourself, am I doing this because it's truly aligned with my values? Or am I doing it because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't? That simple question can be a game changer. Because once you start noticing how often fear is driving your choices, you can start making different ones rooted in self-respect, not self-sacrifice.people-pleasing might get you temporary approval, but it won't bring you peace. Peace comes from knowing who you are, standing in your truth, and being willing to let go of anything or anyone that asks you to be less than that. It's not about becoming cold or selfish. It's about becoming honest and grounded. About learning that your voice matters just as much as anyone else's, that your needs are not a burden, that your worth is not up for negotiation. Saying no is one of the most powerful things a person can do, yet for many, it feels like a betrayal. That tiny word carries so much emotional weight, especially for those who've been conditioned to associate saying no with being selfish, rude, or ungrateful. But the truth is, saying no is not a betrayal. It's not an act of cruelty or neglect. It's a boundary. And boundaries are a necessary part of living a healthy, balanced, self-respecting life. From a young age, many of youth are taught to be agreeable. We're praised when we share, when we help, when we accommodate others. We're encouraged to be nice, to get along, to keep the peace. And while these qualities can serve a purpose, they can also be taken to the extreme. Somewhere along the way, we begin to equate saying yes with being good and saying no with being bad. We learn that compliance equals love and that resistance might lead to disapproval or even rejection. That's where the fear begins to form, the fear that saying no will hurt someone's feelings, damage a relationship, or paint us as cold or uncaring. But that fear is based on a misunderstanding. It assumes that our role is to protect others from discomfort at all costs, even if that cost is our own well-being. It assumes that love means self-abandonment, that relationships are maintained through sacrifice instead of honesty. In reality, true connection can only exist where there is mutual respect. And mutual respect requires boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are guidelines. They're not about keeping people out. They're about defining what's okay and what's not okay and how others treat us and what we're willing to give. Saying no is how we protect our time, energy, mental health, and values. It's how we create space for the things that truly matter to us. When you say no, you are not pushing people away. You are making room for your priorities, your responsibilities, and your own voice. There's a difference between being generous and being exploited. Generosity comes from a full cup when you give because you genuinely want to. But when you're constantly saying yes out of obligation or guilt, That's not generosity. That's fear. That's a lack of boundaries. That's a life led by anxiety instead of intention. And the truth is, every time you say yes when you mean no, you are saying no to yourself. You are silencing your needs, your instincts, and your truth in order to maintain a fragile version of peace. It's important to recognize that saying no doesn't make you mean or unkind. It makes you honest. It means you're not going to overextend yourself just to meet someone else's expectations. It means you respect yourself enough to protect your resources. It means you understand that being everything to everyone is not only impossible, it's unsustainable. When you start saying no without apologizing for it, you begin to reclaim your agency. You stop being a passive participant in your own life and start being an active, intentional one. Sometimes saying no will disappoint people. That's okay. People are allowed to feel disappointed, and you are allowed to disappoint them. It's not your job to manage everyone's emotional responses. You are not responsible for their happiness, just as they are not responsible for yours. When you take responsibility for someone else's feelings by denying your own, you create an imbalance in the relationship. You teach people that your needs are negotiable, and once you do that, you'll find yourself constantly justifying, explaining, and bending to meet their demands. It's also worth saying that some people will try to make you feel guilty for setting boundaries. They may accuse you of being selfish, distant, or uncaring, but that's not a reflection of your boundary. That's a reflection of their entitlement. People who benefit from your lack of boundaries are often the ones who resist them the most. They've grown used to your availability, your compliance, your willingness to put their needs first. When that dynamic changes, it forces them to face their own expectations, and not everyone wants to do that. But the right people, the people who truly respect and care for you, will understand. They might not always like your no, but they will honor it. They will see it as a sign of self-awareness, not rejection. Because in healthy relationships, boundaries are not seen as threats. They are seen as necessary structures that create safety and clarity. A relationship without boundaries is not intimacy, it's enmeshment. And enmeshment leads to resentment, burnout, and a loss of self. Learning to say no takes practice. It's not always easy, especially if you've spent years being the reliable one, the fixer, the person who never says no. But every time you say no with clarity and compassion, you reinforce to yourself and to others that your needs matter. You begin to shift the narrative that your worth is tied to your usefulness. You start to trust yourself more to listen to that inner voice that knows when something doesn't feel right. And saying no doesn't require a justification. You don't need a long explanation, an excuse, or a dramatic story. A simple, that doesn't work for me, or I'm not able to do that, is enough. Your boundaries don't have to be explained to be respected. The more you over-explain, the more you invite negotiation, and your boundaries are not up for negotiation. They are decisions you make to protect your peace. It's also important to remember that no is not negative. In fact, it's one of the most positive, life-affirming words you can use. It clears the clutter. It brings focus. It makes space for your yes, your real, meaningful yes, to the things that align with your values and your goals. When you stop filling your calendar, your mind, and your energy with obligations you resent, you open yourself up to a life that feels more intentional, more honest, and more free. You start to realize that saying no doesn't close doors. It opens them. It opens the door to self-respect. It opens the door to authenticity. It opens the door to relationships that are built on mutual care, not codependence. And it opens the door to a version of yourself that you might have buried under years of performing, pleasing, and pretending. There is strength in your no. There is clarity in your no. And most importantly, there is truth in your no. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you care enough about yourself to choose wisely, to live deliberately, and to stop apologizing for doing what's right for you. Your worth isn't measured by how much you shrink for others. Yet so many people, especially women, have been taught the exact opposite. They've been taught that being less quieter, more agreeable, more accommodating, less opinionated, less Assertive is the path to being accepted, appreciated, even loved. Somewhere along the line, shrinking became synonymous with goodness. You learn to take up less space so that others can be comfortable. You learn to soften your voice so you're not too much. You learn to put others first, even when it drains you, and you tell yourself that this is just what it means to be a good person. But the truth is, your worth was never supposed to come from how small you can make yourself. Shrinking can show up in so many subtle ways. It's not always dramatic or obvious. It can look like apologizing too much, even when you haven't done anything wrong. It can look like brushing off compliments because accepting them feels too bold. It can look like hiding your achievements so others don't feel threatened. It can look like staying silent in meetings when you have something valuable to say. It can look like downplaying your dreams because someone else thinks they're unrealistic. It can look like constantly second-guessing your instincts because someone told you they knew better. All of these are forms of shrinking, of editing yourself to make others more comfortable, but what no one tells you is that comfort isn't the same as connection. You can make everyone else comfortable and still feel completely alone. Because when you're constantly shrinking, people aren't connecting with the real you. They're connecting with a filtered version of you, a version that has been shaped by fear, by expectations, by the need to belong. And over time, that version starts to feel more like a mask than your actual identity. The fear behind shrinking is real. It's the fear of being seen and rejected, the fear of being too much, the fear of standing out and being criticized, the fear of making someone else feel small by standing in your full power. But that fear, if left unchecked, becomes a cage. It keeps you living a life that feels safe on the outside, but suffocating on the inside. You wake up one day and realize that you don't even know who you are anymore because you've been so busy becoming who you think other people want you to be. And the worst part, the world doesn't actually reward you for shrinking. You might think that being agreeable and selfless will earn you respect and love, but often it just makes you invisible. People take you for granted. They assume you'll always say yes, always be available, always prioritize their needs. And when you finally speak up or set a boundary, they act surprised or worse, offended. Because you've trained them to believe that your silence is your default, that your shrinking is who you are. And undoing that conditioning can be hard, but it's also the most powerful thing you'll ever do. You don't have to prove your worth by making yourself smaller. You don't have to tone yourself down to be accepted. Your voice, your ideas, your presence, they're valuable. Not because they make others feel good, but because they are yours. Taking up space is not arrogance, it's not selfishness. It's not aggression, it's honesty, it's authenticity. It's claiming the truth of who you are without apology. And that truth doesn't require anyone else's permission. When you stop shrinking, you start showing up differently. You stop waiting for validation and start creating your own. You stop playing roles and start living in alignment. You start saying what you really think, asking for what you really need, and walking away from what no longer serves you. You begin to trust that you can handle other people's discomfort because their comfort is not your responsibility. And that's when real confidence begins to grow, not the loud, performative kind, but the deep, quiet kind that comes from knowing you're enough. Just as you are Dot, it's not about being loud or aggressive or always needing to be the center of attention. It's about being real, about knowing that your presence doesn't need to be minimized for someone else's ego, that your joy doesn't need to be dimmed so someone else feels better about themselves, that your boundaries are not up for negotiation just because someone else finds them inconvenient. You are allowed to take up space, emotionally, physically, mentally, spiritually. You are allowed to have opinions, desires, dreams, and standards. You are allowed to be visible, and the people who truly value you, who see you for who you are, will never ask you to shrink. They will celebrate your growth, not fear it. They will encourage your expansion, not resent it. Because real relationships, whether personal, professional, or romantic, are not threatened by your strength. They are strengthened by it. You don't have to dim your light for the sake of anyone who prefers the dark. Your shine does not diminish theirs, Dot. It's okay. If not, everyone likes the full version of you. You're not for everyone, and that's a good thing. Trying to be palatable to everyone only leads to losing yourself. The most powerful thing you can do is stop asking for permission to exist fully, to stop seeking approval from people who only like the watered down version of you, to stand in your truth and let the chips fall where they may. Because the ones who are meant to be in your life won't be threatened by your wholeness, they'll be inspired by it. You weren't born to be small. You weren't born to spend your life fitting into tiny boxes or shrinking into roles that make other people feel better about themselves. You were born to expand, to evolve, to step into your full potential without apology. That doesn't mean you won't face resistance. It doesn't mean the path will always be easy. But it does mean that every step you take toward your true self is a step toward freedom. Shrinking for others might win you temporary acceptance, but it will never give you lasting peace. Because peace doesn't come from being liked, it comes from being whole. It comes from knowing that you don't have to earn your place in the world by sacrificing your truth, that you don't have to perform to be loved, that you don't have to disappear to be accepted. You are not here to make yourself small so others feel big. You are here to stand in your light and to live a life that reflects your worth, not one that constantly questions it.